Hey guys! So today you and I are going to talk about feedback. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, hi Frederick, when you receive critical feedback that you don't agree with, how do you defend yourself without sounding defensive or close to the feedback? Well, I would say usually what I try to do is that I try to present my arguments, or sort of like, first and foremost, it's really really important. It's the same rule that I apply when I apologize to someone or something like that. Like, in that conversation, my goal is not to apologize and then explain why and give like a bunch of excuses and stuff like that to a person. When I try to apologize to someone, I am putting the focus on the person in question, their feelings, and that I wronged them and stuff like that. I don't try to make it about me or me trying to mitigate the responsibility that I'm taking in when I had something wrong or something like that. I hope that that makes sense. Like, it's not, I'm not trying, the focus is to just make sure that they feel okay with my apology, and not to try to justify my actions to myself while we're talking. That's really important. Same thing when I get feedback. What I usually do is that I try to listen, for thoroughly listen to the feedback. And the main goal here is to make sure that the person who's giving me the feedback feel as if I have heard them. That is the most important thing that that's the focusing on another person type of thing I'm talking about. My goal isn't to just jump the gun. Like, the worst thing you can do is just to start interrupting people and say, well, oh yeah, but I did it because of that, and like you start making up excuses while they're trying to give feedback. Usually when people give feedback, it's really important to remember that and that's not just in a work situation. I would say that is in any hard conversation that you have with anybody. I usually say that you have to realize that for a lot of people, just giving you feedback is hard for them as well. Like, it's hard for both sides usually, and that's something that you should remember. So when someone was trying to give you feedback, like, some of people are like really really have an easy time with it, some don't. I don't try to make assumptions here. I simply try to make the other person feel as if I've heard them, and if I need to, I usually start by trying to very carefully repeating and saying something along the lines of, so if I understand you correctly, what you're saying is, and then I try to repeat it. And I do that a few times until the person is satisfied, that, or rather, like, sort of says, yeah, I feel this, because like, yeah, to give you a mental picture of what I'm going for, imagine having like a bowl of just dirt or whatever, right? So in the first, like, the person is trying to unload on you basically all the things that they have on the inside, right? And so my goal now is to try to scrape out as much as possible of that. And sometimes I get a bunch of it, and then there's still some stuff stuck at the bottom. So that's why I do the repetition, to make sure that they have exhausted themselves. And that's when I feel like, yeah, okay, they have deflated the balloon, the hot air balloon, or scrape. Well, I managed to scrape out most of the dirt that's in the bowl. Like, I just keep on doing that process until I don't get anything back, or like there's not much more feedback coming. And when I have made sure that the person has had their chance to exhaust all the emotions and things that they have to say to me, or things like that, as I said, it's basically just trying to quote unquote listen intensely, listen with the intention of making people feel as if I'm really listening to them. Because once that happens, I have gone over the threshold. I've passed a barrier, which is very important, which is that, if you start defending yourself before this point, you're basically going to, as you were saying, like, you might sound defensive, you might seem that you're not listening and things like that. Because if people feel, it doesn't matter if you understand their feedback, if you know what they're going to say before they say it or anything like that, that's not what this is about. this is usually an emotional thing for people, which means that it's their emotions you're catering to now, not necessarily like if they're, I don't even think about maybe they're completely right or maybe they're completely wrong. I'm not interested at that point whether they're right or wrong. I'm trying to get them to an emotional state where they have said their piece regardless of if they're right or wrong. And then after that, we can have a rational conversation about like my viewpoints, because this is the second part. Once I've had them gotten them over the emotional part of the conversation, I start presenting my thoughts, and usually I say something along the lines with, well, I suppose the way I think about this is A, B, and C, and then I present my own like thoughts on the topic, and then we go from a very emotional usually conversation for them, because it's sort of like, they're just coming out with it, and that part has to be over before we can start kicking into like rational mode and like talk about things and so forth and so forth. That usually works pretty well. The thing that you need to master a little bit here is your own emotions. At least that's what I try to do, because if you're very sensitive yourself, or rather I've found that to be very true. I see this a lot, by the by, especially when you have weak leadership in tech leads and things like that, where like they're very clearly not interested in hearing out their software developers. I remember this one guy who had a conversation with, and I was in the room. This was not my team, it was another team, but I was part of the conversation, and the tech lead was like, one of the junior software developers was complaining a little bit about, or in her own way, trying to say that, yeah, things are not really working, things like, and the only thing he was saying was that, yeah, but if it's not working, it's because you should work better, or things along those lines. Basically, any problem that she presented was due to the fact that they're not doing things the right way. And I was just sitting to myself thinking, this guy he's losing this person. Holy shit, he's losing this person. Because all I work with their manager, so I knew that behind the scenes later, she of course came to the manager and said that, yeah, this tech lead is never listening, he doesn't take in feedback. And I knew, because I could hear that he was not actually listening to her. He was just basically trying to explain to her that anything that was wrong was because they were doing something that they weren't supposed to be doing, or they were not doing something they were supposed to be doing. He took no accountability, or like as I said, he did not make her feel as he was listening, because I know for a fact that some of the stuff that he said, I mean, it is true. But I also told him later on that, dude, if you're going to present suggestions for, like, if someone's coming to you and like they have problems and so forth, it could be the case that this junior, like for you, it's obvious what they should be doing. They should do A, B, and C. But this person may not actually know that. And if you, in this situation, you might have had a chance to teach them how to do things, because just telling them that, yeah, you're doing it the wrong way, is not going to help them. You can say that I have a few suggestions on how you could do things differently, because I promise you, if they knew what you know, they would have acted. You wouldn't even have a problem, but you have the problem, which means that they probably need someone to show them how to do this thing, or so forth. And incidentally, it might also be the case that we figure out that, yeah, actually they are doing all the right things, and the problem is actually what they are describing, so forth and so forth. So what I want you to take away from this is that usually what I do when I try to defend myself from feedback I don't agree with or something like that is to first and foremost establish, like, exhaust, like deflate the balloon. Because usually when people give you feedback or criticism or whatever, it doesn't matter what tough conversation there is, there's usually a bit of tension in the beginning where they're going to sort of come out with it, right? That part needs to be finished. That's why I see it as a two-parter. Once I have made sure that I feel like I understand the person, I actively listening to them, I don't even, like, at that point I basically don't even process what they're saying, like the criticism itself. I'm not trying to make it about myself, or like trying to like get emotional about this. I'm just trying to get through that part, and that requires a little bit of mindfulness and calm and stuff like that. And a good activity that you can try to apply is to try and see if you can be okay with that someone thinks you're an idiot, or that someone is saying something that isn't 100% true. Like, if you feel the really burning urge to, as soon as someone says something, to defend yourself, like immediately, just jump on them immediately, that's you being like not mature enough to dealing with the situation. Because as I said, at this point, it does not matter if you are 100% correct about your opinion and they're wrong, or so forth and so forth. It is about getting them to a state where they are now able to listen to your response without looking at you as someone who's like being overly defensive and stuff like that. And that requires a bit of calm. So once you have tried to, and my favorite trip is to try to repeat a little bit, like, so if I understand you correctly, what you're saying is like, just try to get that to go through that motion a few times until they more or less say yeah. And so like when the balloon has been deflated to a point where they can talk fairly calmly again, then you move into presenting your thoughts on, like, just explain your viewpoint, and then from that point on, it's a rational, like a very like give and take normal conversation you have with the person. This is extremely important. The first part is the thing you really have to master, because if you can master that part, you will be more successful in both how people perceive you as a co-worker or as a partner or so forth and so forth, because people feel like you are listening to them, and at the same time it's more likely that people will hear your side of things than you create like this conflict where, as you were saying, like you seem just at being defensive and stuff like that. Because in some cases, guys, it's better to just have a conversation and finish on the idea that, well, that other person, because it's not always going to be the case that you see things the same way, but at least if you do this, even if you don't agree with each other, you're still going to end that conversation better than if you had like been defensive and people felt like you didn't really listen to them, because then you have another problem. Now you create the next fight further down the line where people feel like, I can never talk to Fredrik because he's always dismissing me, or like stuff like that. At least with this approach, they might go, yeah, Fredrik has done a few things here and there, but at least he's taking in the feedback, he's at least listening to me. That is a much better state for you. At least what I think. Have a great day.